Honkai Star Rail 4.1 has released, and with it solves a lot of things. But it also leaves us with more questions than answers. Ashveil revealed his true identity, HIMEKO revealed her surname, and what Evanescia is, I could not have possibly guessed. But what is more important of all of this is that the Herald of Death, both previous and current, has been exposed and defeated. However, they have left a much more threatening enemy in their place. A cult of abundance masquerading as elation, while we are entirely clueless of the Lord Ravager lurking in the shadows. Watching, waiting, plotting, and scheming, with us most likely playing perfectly into his hands. Oh yeah, things got complicated, and with so many thoughts of what is really going on here swirling around in my head, I would love to get into them, but before we do any of that, we gotta break down what we just experienced. So without further ado, this is the last Phantasmoon Games Explained. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is the same as always. I tell the story with less jumping around and time skips, so everything makes more sense and is much more simple and understandable. Alright, so our story begins after the defeat of Sparksy and her Sparksicon mimetic virus, where we, along with March 7th, get lectured by Kuchiba about aberrations and the threat levels of said aberrations. The specific details of this are for another day, but the important part in all of this is that Sparksy is in fact considered an aberration, and would be imprisoned because she isn't supposed to exist, which confirms my Sparksy is a prisoner theory, because this means the laws do not protect her and she has no rights. Very, very sad for Sparksy. But anyway, Kuchiba warns us about the new Herald of Death and leaves, and we receive a text from Weld who asks us in regards to how HIMEKO's conversation with her dad went. And here is where we're gonna have to catch back up with these three, because here is where we get to see what happened after the HIMEKO is dead line was dropped, only for us to see the most disappointing reveal in this entire story. Ryusuke was joking. Yes, he was joking. Every theory about alternate timelines crossing over is now in the trash because this guy decided to tell the worst joke of all time, leading up to a cliffhanger. But my frustration aside, the rest of this plays out as what I can only describe as HIMEKO's daddy issues. But what is interesting here is that HIMEKO is, or was, afflicted by something called a weathering curse. A curse that Ryusuke was trying to cure for the majority of HIMEKO's life, entirely oblivious to the fact that she had fixed the Express, become the Express's navigator, and also lived through the curse that he was trying to cure. But he did not return to Plain Arcadia until HIMEKO left to find HIMEKO's gravestone. And yes, HIMEKO, there is something very strange about purchasing and leaving a gravestone for yourself for absolutely no reason. If you cured yourself from a terminal illness, it is common courtesy to let the guy who is looking for a cure for you know that he can stop looking instead of faking your death for, again, absolutely no reason.
But no, she didn't think she would live.
Oh, so you just prematurely make a grave for yourself? Who does that? Normal people just make a will or something. But believe me, I'm not on Ryusuke's side either, because this guy makes no sense half the time either. I could make a whole video on how strange his thought process is, but HIMEKO, you are definitely his daughter because you act just as irrationally as he does. But anyway, after HIMEKO storms off, Ryusuke tells us that the weathering curse is from Graphia, a sacrifice she made to save Plain Arcadia from the Antimatter Legion years ago. And now all of her descendants simply weather away and die before the age of 30. And since we can estimate that HIMEKO is definitely over the age of 30 since she was in high school and now she isn't. If she was a senior in high school, she would have to be around 17-ish years old. So yeah, she's definitely over 30. So she should be dead, but she isn't, in a different way than we thought before. And after giving Ryusuke a tour of the Express, HIMEKO returns to continue having daddy issues and drops some info that conflicts with what we have read before. Because here she says that she in fact defeated the Herald of Death 15 years ago. But what is written implies that a giant arm descended from the sky and crushed the Herald of Death, which knocked him out, allowing the Department of Aberration Defense to arrest him. So either that giant arm was her doing, or something is off here too, she doesn't explain. She also doesn't explain how she gave Dolly a mask of elation 15 years ago and it still works now. Or how you can just pass down a supplicant mask. And the Graphia family kept re-entering the games because of it, monopolizing one of the coveted 8 spots. I guess the Phantasmoon games has always been rife with corruption, but that's besides the point. Point is, something about the Bloodstained games allowed HIMEKO to overcome the Weathering Curse. And it's not because she won, because she doesn't ever say that she won the games. And she doesn't exactly seem to be too sure about what it's like to be an Aeon for the 1 minute. Or else I feel like she would have told us. So in summary, HIMEKO should have died before turning 30, but she's not. We don't exactly know why, but we have some ideas. She made a grave for herself for absolutely no reason. She stopped the Herald of Death, we don't know how. She fixed the Express, we still don't know how. And refuses to answer questions, and we don't know why. You go, girl, give us nothing but your last name, because it is revealed that HIMEKO's last name is none other than Murata. Because what else would it be? So, putting this frustrating part of the story behind us, things finally start to heat up. Because we return to the Trailblazer, March and Welt, who are called for a meeting with Pearl in her own personal company, Perlux Corp, where we meet Ashveil along the way, who has begun his investigation into the Research Society of Happy Smiles. More on that later. But much to Welt's delight, Perlux Corp HQ is filled with Mechatrons. So Welt nerds out, and we run into our guide, who just happens to be Nihilux? Yeah, apparently Sparkle isn't the only one who likes to steal guide jobs, because Nihilux shows up and shows us around and does a really good job of playing her part, explaining how Megatrons are drawn from blueprints and entirely automated rather than a human drawing them like how it's supposed to be. It's literally AI art. Sparkle was not joking when she said the IPC's elation was boring, though it is ironic that a mangaka is explaining all of this to us. But anyway, the LARP Rangers show up, and the gray one happens to be a huge fan of us. So Nihilux puts together a fight scene for us, and this awesome cutscene happens, we win, and Welt is the happiest man in plain Arcadia, which is saying something considering the state of the LARP Rangers, but that's a spoiler. So Nihilux leaves, and our real tour guide shows up and takes us to our favorite CEO of AI art, Pearl, who asks us what it is we would do if we were to win the Phantasmoon games, and we tell her that our plan is to use an IOU from AHA to get AHA to lead the Anti-Destruction Alliance. A plan I am personally convinced will not work, because AHA will simply say, "Aren't you AHA right now?" and then force us to lead the Anti-Destruction Alliance. The very thing we didn't want to do. Because remember, AHA always has the final say. When the guy tried to kill AHA, this Aeon said the exact same thing. "Aren't you AHA right now?" and the guy died. So personally, I think this plan sucks. Just wish the Amphorius people into reality and call it a day. Cyrene is suffering in an eternal loop of pain, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Because the CEO of Disrespect replies and says, "I was just being polite. I don't care what your wish is. You're not winning anyway because I'm a supplicant too." So we do a bit of trash talking and flexing our allies on each other. Pearl for some reason thinks Ashveil and Silverwolf are reliable allies, and we think Sparksy is, but I think we can rely on Sunday because he definitely doesn't want to win. So Pearl tells us her plan to draw the last 2 remaining supplicants out of hiding by throwing a giant festival themed around the Express crew. Or, I guess, the Fluffy Across the Blue crew. And we accept with no objections, and Pearl gives us this coin that totally isn't a tracking device, and tells us to go find Blurry QR Colt, aka Nihilux. Fitting for the Year of the Horse, but a female baby horse is called a filly, not a colt, but that doesn't matter. So the Express crew leaves. But we're gonna stay with Pearl a bit longer, because here is where Ashveil shows up. And before taking Pearl's assignment to serve as the Express crew's secret service, Ashveil has some suspicions, because he found out that the IPC has been paying the families of the victims of the Bloodstained games into silence. And Pearl says this:
Am I supposed to give you a round of applause now?
I swear, this Clanker is the most disrespectful character we have ever seen. I know she does this on purpose too. I can't prove it yet. She knows when she's being sarcastic and backhanded because after being exposed for paying people into silence, she tries to pay Ashveil into silence because she clearly thinks he's stupid. It doesn't work, and then she says this.
Oh, an unexpected choice. It defies my usual understanding of your decision tree. Note, I say this without sarcasm or ridicule.
When you have to note when you are not being backhanded and sarcastic, there's a problem. She says she respects him, but then she says stuff like this. Pearl is a problem. Anyway, he gets the answer out of her, and it turns out that the Herald of Death 15 years ago was a man by the name of Marcus Antali, an Intelligentsia Guild member, specifically the School of Evolutionary Perfection. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because this school was responsible for nearly resurrecting Rupert during the Scholars' Strife, which is why the big bad scary scalpel lady in a candy-colored dress, Polka Kakamon, had to show up and get rid of them. So needless to say, the IPC really wanted to cover this one up. That much makes sense. But as confirmation, Marcus Antali is very much dead and is not coming back. So this is a copycat Herald of Death we are dealing with. So Pearl agrees to let Ashveil kill whoever this new Herald of Death is, and they part ways. And Ashveil meets back up with Kuchiba, and they continue looking into the Full Wish Research Society of Happy Smiles situation together. And it's bad. They are a full-on cult with Full Wish at the head of it with the masses wrapped around her finger. But through her excessive preaching, Ashveil notices that there are some details about this new Herald of Death that Full Wish shouldn't know. So Ashveil and Kuchiba make a tactical retreat, and they find the Grey LARP Ranger among the cultists. So they follow him, he doesn't talk, other cultists show up, Ashveil beats them unconscious, and they get up anyway. They don't feel pain, and they only feel happiness. So Ashveil asks Cinderbum what is going on with them, and he explains how the transformation surgery works. It's a tiny implant placed into the eyes that numbs all sense of pain, both past and present. A procedure that the Grey Ranger hasn't had yet, but everyone else in his team has. So even if this isn't news on the Herald of Death situation, it is a concerning discovery. More on that later. So meanwhile, the Trailblazer and March 7th go find Nihilux and remember that her real job is the president of Furbobo Weekly, or I guess ex-president. And she tells us about her achievement of creating Fluffy Across the Blue, her writer's block, and gives us a peek into the plight of writing for modern short attention span audiences. Which is so meta because older mangas like One Piece and Naruto have like 100 chapters of startup, but more recent ones do not have that luxury. The pace has to be quick to keep up with audience's interests, or they hit the skip button and watch videos like mine. So just in case you skipped this, Nihilux dunked on you for doing so. She also mentioned where she gets her info too. She hired some memo keepers to feed her some leaks from Amphorius, but they got taken out, and I don't think we need to wonder what happened to them. But anyway, we get her to attend the festival and we leave. So time passes and we go to the festival with March, and the story hits the gas, because this is where we run into Nihilux, Evanestia, Sparksy, who is still on the run from the police, and the LARP Rangers. But focusing on Evanestia for a hot second, we get this shot of us opening our eyes to her leaning over us, and this is a shot Hoyo just loves to do with Yae characters. Literally every single one of them has done it. And I think this is just a great little reference. Evanestia also says that her drawing our mask makes our mask fake. So yeah, we don't really know what that means, but we aren't really supplicants, but the Phantom Moon thinks we are. So that'll be important going forward. But going back to the story, the LARP Rangers show up, who reveal themselves as supplicants and challenge us to a fight. They lose again, and they retreat. And continuing throughout the festival, we see the single best NPC name in the game, Giga Chad Toilet King. Thank you, localization team. You guys need a raise. I laughed at this for a good 5 minutes, but moving on. We finally reunite with HIMEKO, who questions who and what Evanescence is, and this is when she wastes absolutely no time in leaving, by pulling up her own background and then disappearing. And then Sparksy calls in to show us how we've been villainized by Full Wish TV for simply defending ourselves, along with our words in an interview being taken very much out of context, switching the audience support from us into the LARP Rangers, giving them a giant wish power advantage. And just as the danger levels reach a feverish pitch, our bodyguard shows up to complete the crew. Everyone has shown up, and now it's time for the big battle. Side note, that Dahlia in the background was a furbo. I'm very much upset, and this is why I hate furbos. And now, the final showdown with the LARP Rangers, who just outright admit to being the Herald of Death copycat. Scott died to this. Man, I almost feel bad for him. But anyway, we fight them, and the Rangers simply don't go down. They can't feel pain, and they are as stubborn as I am for not calling them by their name. Forgive me. Dawnbreak is too similar to Dawnmaker, and these frauds do not deserve that honor. But just as we get knocked onto our back foot, Ashveil reveals his true identity, none other than the leader of the Galaxy Rangers that I've been saying since February, Mancha. And he absolutely one-shots the Rangers, and we all get dragged into a place called the Land of Sneering Gods, where Ashveil takes over and finishes his hunt once and for all, letting whatever it is that is in his hand absorb the 3 Rangers, leaving only the gray one alive. Then the Trailblazer gets possessed by something? I'm sorry, I have no clue what this is. And Ashveil saves us, and Pearl brings us back to her office, telling us that that land is what she refers to as a torn scroll, a fragment of Planar Cadia that broke off when the IPC brought it back from the scroll painting. But that problem is for another day, because what is truly scary is that Ashveil claims to have tasted the power of abundance in the 3 Heralds of Death, because in fact, all 3 of the LARP Rangers that Ashveil killed happen to be supplicants. How Full Wish managed this, I have no clue. But I think this confirms that she is the octopus mass, because she's extending her tentacles everywhere to infect other people and making her reach vast, and somehow also making other people supplicants. I don't know how she's doing that, but I can't prove it. I can't prove it, but I know she's doing it. And here is where we can finally address where Dan Heng has been this whole time, because he, along with Yao Guang, have been sensing some abundance power in Planar Cadia. So Dan Heng went to track down Blade, but Blade tells him he's not the only one with strong abundance path energy. Why? Well, to answer this, we gotta look into the final scene in the quest. Yao Guang in the Phantom Moon courtyard, who isn't fooled by Evanescia's disappearing act and demands some answers. And if I wasn't too distracted by this tree not being pink, I would have noticed the yellow veins in the tree bark, identical to those of the ambrosial arbor. And yes, this is an abundance tree, and Evanescia appears to be a being spawned from said tree, but is also in possession of elation power. Whether this makes her a creation of Yaoshi, an emanator, or anything like that, I can't be too sure for now, but that is where the story ends. But not before Silverwolf enters the chat following the announcement from the Phantom Moon itself that this will be the last Phantom Moon games, and whoever wins becomes the permanent Aeon of Elation. Was this Silverwolf's doing? Whose side is she on? What is her grand scheme? What new powers has she unlocked with her Hersher of Truth wings and Thanos Infinity Gauntlet? We don't know. Hoyo hit us with another cliffhanger. But this being the last Phantom Moon games was foreshadowed by Ryusuke saying that he wished for the Phantom Moon to always stay full, so that HIMEKO would stay in Planar Cadia. And when dealing with AHA, you always have to be careful of what you wish for, because this changes everything. And above all, we can't let Full Wish win. The abundance elation cultists are out there and they want to be happy and spread their happiness everywhere in the creepiest, worst way possible. And we gotta stop them. Because this is the last Phantom Moon Games Explained. There are some details I left out here and some subjects that require some more reading for me to understand more about, but as of right now, this is my reaction slash recap slash retelling of the story so that we are all on the same page for future theories. It's time to reset the progress with newly gained intel and get to work once again. I am hyped for Ashveil. This guy really stole the show this patch, and I am hyped to see what he does in the future. He wasn't the Herald of Death, kinda glad about that though, but he is La Mancha, the leader of the Galaxy Rangers, who is probably one of the strongest Path Striders we have ever seen. What do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace, y'all.